everybody just thinks horror when they think about Edgar Allan Poe. They don't know that he wrote, a lot of comedy. He wrote just about everything. Science fiction. He wrote the first detective novel, which, led to Sherlock Holmes being created years later. So I definitely wanted to do something with him to draw attention to Poe.
Hi, and welcome to The Caption Life, a podcast about the impact of comics and pop culture on life and society. My name is Kevin, and I'm broadcasting from just outside of Houston, Texas. Joining me via mostly reliable high-speed internet connection are my good friend Sean from the guest bedroom at Castle Grayskull, and James jumping in from Asgard by way of Western Kentucky and the Bifrost. Tonight we are lucky enough to have a guest, Mr. Dwight MacPherson, who is going to be telling us about the comic that he has written, The Imaginary Adventures of Edgar Allan Poe.
Let me kind of get that. It's The Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, I'm sorry, Imaginary Voyages. I typed it in wrong. I also misspelled Allen, and James corrected it like it was going to sound different.
I love that though. The Imaginary Adventures, it's like it's all made up.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
do you guys want me to do that part again so that Dwight's plug is? Because some poor souls will be like, I cannot find The Imaginary Adventures of Edgar Allan Poe anywhere. Like I can find Voyages, but I don't want that crap.
Yeah.
For fun, I'm just going to leave it in.
That's not the same thing. So tonight we are lucky enough to have a guest, Mr. Dwight MacPherson, who is joining us to tell us about the comic he has written, The Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thanks for joining us.
Welcome. So Dwight, we'd also like to really hear about HP Comics and what your role there is.
HP Comics is my production company. We're producing I'm self-publishing. And so what we did is we put together a team, and we also, they're good friends. Amy Sturgis, James has met her. She's a Dr. Amy Sturgis. She is a professor, and she's a lecturer, and she's done all kinds of stuff. But she's good friends with us, and she does some editing work for us. So yeah, I'm the publisher, I'm the writer, I'm the editor. No, but I do have a lot of great people around me who help me with editing, because the more eyes you can get on text, the better. So yeah, they're friends that have come alongside me to help me produce the best comics that I possibly can. And, we released Elevator that was edited by Amy Sturgis, and I think it's pretty phenomenal. And now we're doing Edgar Allan Poe, which my wife is editing.
I just want to go full disclosure here. I've been working with Dwight now for about a year and a half with Hocus Pocus Comics as one of his education coordinators, along with Tim Smythe. So, since we're kind of getting this podcast kind of up and going, I kind of had to pull some strings and get the boss in here to kind of help out and maybe help us get the podcast going a bit more. Dwight, I'm glad you could be here.
What you're saying is, even on small podcasts, it's more about who you know than
Exactly.
than anything else.
Exactly.
It's good to have connections, and Dwight, we're glad that you could join us.
Definitely.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here. We've been looking forward to it. So
Good.
let's do it.
Sounds good. Let's jump right on in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, as Kevin said, this show is about exploring the impact that comics has had on us, on our lives and our society. So we want to ask you, how did comics have an impact on you?
Well, the first book that I can remember looking at was a comic, and, they were always with me. I was always drawing. When I was little, I used to take scissors and cut open paper bags, and I would draw Spider-Man and Captain America and the Hulk. And of course, we had the great, 60s, which are not so great. I showed them to my kids, and they're like, this sucks, but anyways, so I grew up, with superheroes and everything. And I think really when they impacted me the most was, in the 80s, because, let's face it, your middle school years suck. So, comics like X-Men and, with Chris Claremont and Paul Smith, and Swamp Thing, of course, with Alan Moore, and Stephen Bissett, and those comics kind of really helped me get through that time. You know, it was tough. I was the token fat kid, you know. So I was picked on a lot, so I could really identify with the X-Men. I really looked forward to getting the next issue. I don't know. I mean, they kind of gave me a reason to keep going on, you know, if you will.
Well, Dwight, we only host this this podcast from the shoulders up, but I think like you don't worry about being the token fat kid here.
Right.
Hey, it's a fat kid's world now.
Right.
Exactly.
So,
True. Yeah.
you got to work on that, Sean, you know. Work on the midsection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Sean is 11 feet tall. He would have to gain 400 pounds to be fat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Full disclosure, I'm actually 6'6", and I know, and you can never tell on Zoom, and it's funny, not to get on sidetracked, but everyone that I meet on Zoom, when I meet with them in person the first time, that's what they all say. They're just like, "Oh my gosh, you're so tall," you know, and
What a terrible problem to have.
yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I know.
I'm vertically challenged, so yeah.
I'm sorry.
If it makes you feel any better, he doesn't have any hair under that hat.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, I'm going that way, so
I went that way when I was 19. So
You've got to trade in your height or your hair.
right. Yeah.
Okay, so Dwight, you know, it's one thing to be an avid reader of comics. I mean, I know I read a lot, Sean, Kevin a lot. I mean, I know you've read a lot for years, but you know, it's quite another to be involved in creating your own. So what kind of drove you to write comics and produce them on your own?
Well, it was in high school. I had a really good friend named J.S. Earls, and he's also working in comics as well. I got to edit some of his books and stuff, but we made our own comics in school, and we made one, and it was Xeroxed copies. It was an anime style, you know, a manga style comic called Mech Aegis, and we actually took it to the owner of Jeppy's Comic World in Clearwater, Florida. Name sound familiar? Steve Jeppy. And he said, "Hey, I'll buy those from you and sell them." So he put them on the shelf. So that would have been like in 1986 when, you know, so we were on the cutting edge, I guess you would say, of the whole manga and anime craze back in 86. So, but what really pushed me, I guess, to say this is what I want to do professionally was after I read Swamp Thing Annual #1 by Alan Moore. I mean, I was just like, I want to do this. So Alan Moore really has been a huge inspiration to me. And I actually was up for an Eagle Award several years back, and I lost to Alan Moore. I was like, oh my God, I lost to Alan Moore. Yeah. You know, that's like a crowning achievement. And put it in all my bios and everything. No. But yeah, so that's really, I had great friends around me who also enjoyed comics. You know, like I said, I was the token guy, so I hung out with the nerds, and we read comics and made comics and played chess and D&D and all that. V&V, Villains and Vigilantes. Anybody remember?
Oh, I don't think I've heard of that one.
No.
Oh man, I'm really big.
You're going down a really dark path here, Dwight.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
I love how Kevin was just so blunt about that.
They were illustrated by Bill Willingham, you know, who got into comics through illustration for Villains and Vigilantes. So,
interesting.
Yeah,
and he illustrated Fables, didn't he?
Yes.
See, I know my stuff, guys.
You're so
He's
proud of that.
For a long time.
No, true story. One of my best friends has all the Fables omnibuses, and he walks around with them, and I make fun of him for it. It's not. It's just because it's one of those I read comics, but fantasy comics. Oh my gosh, though that's beneath me. No, I can't be like that. I'm when anybody finds the comic that they love, I'm super excited about it. So
absolutely.
Now, Dwight, I noticed something actually today when I just happened to be coming across your name. I think you show up in IMDb, don't you?
Yeah, that's hilarious. I show up in a lot of places. I think I worked on Care Bears the movie.
Yes, that's what showed up in IMDb.
Know.
Yeah.
And it never reflected in my account. I don't know. I mean, the lost years, maybe. I actually wrote an issue of Fantastic Four as well.
Really?
And I didn't even know it. But Marvel, if you check Marvel's database, I've done that as well. So I guess I'm doing it when I'm in my sleep.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
Right.
It's strange. It's very strange.
So it's not you is what you're saying. You're going on record.
It's not me. No.
That's interesting.
Well, I should be on there, actually. I don't know if you've heard of the, I cringe to mention this, but Howard Lovecraft in the Frozen Kingdom.
Oh, really?
I co-wrote that with Bruce Brown. He was my best man at my wedding, but we're good friends. I co-wrote that book, and I wrote the second book, Howard Lovecraft in the Undersea Kingdom, and those have both been made into films. So I should have credit, but there are some people in this world who do not give credit where credit is due, and I will leave it at that. But as bad as the movies are, you know what I mean? I'm like, okay, it's so uncredited. What we always do is say, hey, go read the books. Read the book.
Right. I actually wrote most of the script for Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I took my name off of it immediately.
We don't wait.
Yeah, I would definitely
hashtag Martha.
I know now why that movie was so bad.
Right. It explains so much now. Right. Oh shoot. Okay, so Dwight, so you now have a Kickstarter for the 6th issue of the Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe. So we want to ask you, why did you choose Poe for this particular story?
Well, like I said, it was tough growing up. I'm a preacher's son, so there's a lot that goes with that as well. So I really got into Poe at a young age, started reading his books and everything. So as I grew older, I started researching his life to actually find out about Edgar Allan Poe, the man. And the more that I read about him, the more that I saw what I perceived as like commonalities between us and things we had in common. And he didn't see the level of fame that he should have in his lifetime. He was an outsider. I'm an outsider as well. I've done the traditional printing stuff. I created an original series for DC Comics. I've been published by Image, IDW, yada yada yada. But Poe's first book was self-published. Mm-hmm. So there's the more commonalities that I saw, and the more I started digging into his life and his works, and I really realized what a complex man he was and how diverse his taste in literature was. So, everybody just thinks horror when they think about Edgar Allan Poe. They don't know that he wrote, a lot of comedy. He wrote just about everything. Science fiction. He wrote the first detective novel, which led to Sherlock Holmes being created years later. So I definitely wanted to do something with him to draw attention to Poe, hoping that because I know being a kid sometimes they will read, teachers will read like The Raven to their class, and I think sometimes some kids have a hard time kind of relating to that. But if you can show them a book and show them about some of the struggles of Edgar Allan Poe, the man, and maybe make that connection that way, then they can relate to the actual literature and enjoy his work as well. So that was my hope in doing this. And I'm a huge Tolkien nerd and C.S. Lewis fan. And so I just really poured everything into this, and I could do it because Poe loved mythology. He was big into mythology. So that allowed me to play with all the mythological creatures like, you name it. We took Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, and we just kind of threw it in a blender and said, this is what's inside Edgar Allan Poe's head. Because it's very interesting. A lot of times when we dream about things we've seen on the movies or TVs, But what did they dream about in the 1800s when they didn't have movies and they didn't have TV? You know, I think that perhaps what they dreamt about was literature, what they were reading, you know, the things that they actually read about. So, and of course they did have theater as well, but, you know, we know, thanks to Shakespeare and the great plays of the Greeks that still exist and exist in his time, that he could have, you know, very easily seen those on the stage. So I said, let's just do this. All of his interests, everything that he enjoyed, let me put it all together in a way that makes Edgar Allan Poe hopefully more accessible, because his own works, a lot of his characters show up in the story as well. But also his interest. And of course you see how, you know, tormented he was as well in the last year of his life. And I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, I think I did. But anyways, yeah, I think it'll be a way that you know, maybe some readers who are reluctant. I know my middle son is autistic, and he did not want to read at all. So I got him some comics, and he started reading those. And then I started writing all ages comics, and then he read all those. And, you know, the next thing you know, he's reading the Odyssey, you know, and 1984, reading a lot of Orwell and Ray Bradbury. And I basically gave a list to my kids and said, you're going to read all these books before you leave home. So, you know, they read all the classics that I wanted them to read. So that's a long way around your question, but I think I answered it.
Yeah, no, that was really great insight. I really like that. Thank you.
You know what I find particularly interesting about it is that as a kid, I didn't really like Edgar Allan Poe because I'm a scaredy cat. Like, seriously, I don't like scary movies. I don't like scary books. And I was a little bit hesitant to like pick it up because I still don't like those kind of things. And I don't know why. It's just not a particular thing. But like, you took Edgar Allan Poe and you made it visual, and I was like, oh, it's give me like it's just gonna give me the willies. Like I'm gonna have to like cover my eyes as I turn pages and avoid jump scares and things like that. But I thought it was. I mean, I was able to get through the first three the issues and what James had sent us. Man, it moves so fast. It's very very sharp, and it really is an adventure story, and I thought it was fantastic. So
oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
You know, now that we're kind of beginning to talk about your issues of the imaginary voyages of Edgar Allan Poe, your Kickstarter's now over 115% funded for the 6th issue, and you've kind of begun to tease the war for Terra Somnium, and I was wondering if you could kind of give us just maybe a little glimpse or a little like peek into kind of where you're going with that.
Well, that's a very good question. If you've read the first trade paperback, I think that you can agree that it ends kind of like, what just happened?
I just said that I'm only on number 3.
Oh, okay.
So don't spoil it. We have a history of spoiling things on here. James ruined the ending of Spider-Man: Homecoming in the first 6 seconds of our last podcast.
No.
Right.
Yeah, I did. That's okay. Well,
you go ahead and talk about it. I'm still going to read it as soon as we stop talking. So
right.
Maybe take your headphones off, and we'll wave to get you back.
I'm going to check my Twitter feed.
There you go. About the war in Terra Somnium. You know, as you know from what you've read thus far, the Nightmare King wants to take over. He wants to take Edgar Allan Poe's place. And so he's trying very desperately to destroy our little Poe, which we call Pooh, and Virginia, and Edgar Allan Poe himself. So we have this war that's, if you read the first book, there are some clues in there. I'm going to try not to spoil it, but there are some clues in there that point to exactly what's going on in Terra Somnium. And I don't want to give away too much, but what it is. It's a war between the Dream Child, which is Pooh, Master Pooh, and the Nightmare King. And that's what the War of Terror Somnium is about. But it's everyone's involved. All the mythological creatures and gods that live in Terror Somnium have chosen sides, and they are fighting on one or the other armies. So, think Lord of the Rings, right? So that's what's going on.
Every great series has a war there, whether it's Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, there's always something in there. And I'm really excited for this one. I mean, it's been a couple years, trying to get to this point, and I am really excited for this. So if you've not gotten into this story yet, please do so.
Even Care Bears has a war, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think I wrote that, didn't I?
Dwight, I would love to be able to write someday, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on, like, how did you take a character or a person that like the world knows a fair amount about? It's not necessarily a character like writing like Batman fan fiction would be, but you took somebody that the world knows a fair amount about, and you created this adventure around what you knew about him. What kind of went into the process, and do you find yourself doing that with other characters? Like, oh, I've got a really great P.T. Barnum story like floating around in there. Because I'm thinking, man, that would be a great like intro, like find a character or somebody that their life exists in, what is it called? When nobody has a copyright on it anymore. I'm totally blanking.
Oh, yeah, public domain.
Yeah, so somebody in public domain, and then create a story around it. That seems like there's a wealth of stories that could be told about that. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what you went through with that?
Well, it was really a culmination of a lifetime of research about the character, particularly the last 10 years of his life. And there's a lot, with a lot of writers, we have so much on him. I mean, if you look at Longfellow, I mean, he kept journals. We have a wealth of writings by Longfellow, for instance. Edgar Allan Poe did not keep a journal that we know of. So the documentation is very, very sparse as to what we have recorded about what he did and where he went. He maybe is mentioned in a newspaper here, but we don't have a wealth of knowledge, especially about the end of his life. I mean, it's a total mystery of how a man sets out for New York and ends up dead in Baltimore. So there's so much there, and there's already a myth surrounding him. He died as mysteriously as the impact the books had. So there was a lot to play with there. When you're dealing with myths and legends, there's so much that you can do. I mean, I've heard that by the time Homer's Iliad was recorded, it had changed so much over the years that each bard would actually add more to the story and change parts of the story, so that by the time we finally get the story, it's like the game of telephone. It's something better. I don't know. I wasn't able to sample the source material, but it becomes something different at the end. So I would just suggest, if you want to do that, I actually wrote a book called Houdini and the Silver Dollar Misfits. That's about there's a legend surrounding Houdini that when he was young, he ran off and joined the circus. So I said, okay, I'm going to have him do that. And these are his adventures during that time while he's in the circus. And that was a lot of fun. And I just did another book called Houdini's Silver Dollar Misfits, which kind of is like a sequel that takes place 100 years later. So, yeah, I mean, if you have a great idea for them and they are in the public domain, I mean, why not write it? I mean, people were fascinated with. I know I was personally fascinated with Houdini. I remember In Search of Houdini, with Leonard Nimoy and just being fascinated with this guy. And the more I studied him, the guy was an immigrant, I mean, he came over here with his family and had nothing. And, by the time he died, he was like the number one rock star, in America and in the world. I mean, how he did that himself. I mean, that's amazing. So it just fascinated me, and I wanted to write stories about him where he actually had actual magical abilities. So that's what I did. So do it.
All right, I'm going to. Here comes the book that I'm going to write about 13th president Millard Fillmore solving crimes.
That sounds so convincing right now, Kevin.
Yeah.
Do you think I'm really going to tell you my idea now so that you can steal it, Sean?
No.
So the three of us are educators in some form or fashion, with James and I having like direct like in the classroom. What kind of impact are you hoping to make, like when it comes to like writing comics and having things available for like, or with education in general?
Well, when I was a kid, I could go to 7-Eleven and pick up a couple comics and a big gulp and, leave with them. But that's changed now. And kids are not getting access to comic books like we did. We had totally open access. So where Scholastic has really hit is by putting them in the classrooms. And if you actually introduce comics in the classroom, that's the future of comics. Everybody can talk about, well, the future of comics is digital, No, get it into the hands of students. That's the future. That's going to ensure that we have a secure future. Now, if we can show, young readers how amazing it is to have beautiful art and literature together, which is, my book is very literary. I think you'd agree.
Awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm pushing. I don't want readers to stay reading comic books only exclusively. But I know that my autistic son did not do that. I mean, he went from comics to, the Iliad eventually. So what I'm hoping to accomplish is that, young readers can see comics and maybe have, form a lifetime love of the medium. In Asia, it's not like, it only 12 to 35-year-olds are reading manga. It's everybody. I was on a train to Seoul, Korea, and the benches were literally filled with manga and manga. Excuse me, my son would say, Dad. But anyways, one person would come along and they would read it. And this might be a 65-year-old woman, and she'll put it down on the bench. And the next person will come in, a 15-year-old. And you just pick it up and read it and leave it on the bench. And they just kept, we've made them collectible. Over there, it's entertainment.
Right.
They enjoy them,
Mm-hmm.
But really, I think that's where it is. We want to inspire young readers to seek out the classics, to read the classics. I mean, I know that, that just makes I can remember getting a note from my son's teacher. She said, "It breaks my heart, but I have to ask your son to put away his book during class so that I can teach a lesson." Because teachers are trying so hard to get kids to read, but
right.
She had to actually ask him to please put down the book so he could, be involved in the lesson. So, man, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I get a couple of those every year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you see, that's awesome. In other cultures, comics are high art. When I went to France for a convention, and we set up in huge bookstore, and they had they treated me like Stephen King, up in there. I was with an artist friend of mine that's French, and he's like, they're like, "Oh, we get you some coffee," and he, my friend elbows me and he says, "No, we want beer." He's like, "Okay, we'll get you beer." So they brought me beer, we're drinking beer and signing books, I was like, is this real?
Right.
Somebody pinch me, cosplayers get better treatment in conventions in America than writers. So it's like, wow, this is like insane.
It's great.
Anyways.
True story. The first time that I ever cosplayed with my son, we had about 50 people want to come and take pictures with us. And I was like, yeah, Madden thought he was a total celebrity that day, but like deep down inside, I was like, I am a king.
Nice.
So yeah, no, I completely see that. I think there's a lot of things that we see backwards in this country. We're conditioned to think that like literature, like traditional literature is the only way, and we're trying to program young people to be the same way, whereas we get further and further away from that as a society every year with what's available in video and online. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think comics really do make they engage your brain in a different way, because whereas a traditional book, you would have to read it and use your imagination to visualize the story. The comics are written in a way where you get part of that visualized for you, but a lot of times you have to infer some of the what the author would be describing, or infer the emotion of it, because it's on the face of the character rather than being, oh, like, Ron felt sad because Hermione dumped him. So
Right.
no,
Exactly.
it's such a unique thing, and I, for one, I believe, like, as a teacher, we have to be encouraging kids to do both, right? Because
Right.
sticking to one or the other isn't going to help you grow. And this
Right.
is coming from somebody who hasn't read a book without pictures like in 20 years, because the books I care about and the characters I care about are all in comic books. But you have to be willing to grow, and I make my son like read one book, and then he can read a graphic novel, and then flip back and forth. But like, I'm like, you pick what you want, but one of those has to be prose and one of those can have pictures. So
Yeah. Well, and
Right.
I think even related to that, going back to what Dwight was saying with like comics and education, I can see, especially with your comic about Edgar Allan Poe, that's a great way for literature teachers to take that comic and use that as an introduction to who Poe is. So that way, how many times have we seen, or where we're in the classroom and we see, literature teachers spend like a couple days kind of setting up the background of like who this author was, why it's important before they even start going into the book. But comic is like a really quick, insightful way to be able to get the story of that person, and maybe, reduce that time by half to have a conversation instead of lecturing about it, and kind of get people's thoughts, because comics elicits not just like factual information, but it creates like empathy and context and emotions that you can draw out from the illustrations as well too. And so I can see comics being just a really great way in education to be able to introduce subjects like that. So even if we think about, like, I think high schoolers now, all of them were born after September 11. So none of them know or experience that event. So being able to use that Spider-Man comic to kind of be able to elicit that feelings and experience that people were having after that happened is a great way to be able to relate empathy and to be able to show how this impacted and how powerful, well, I don't want to say powerful, but how tragic it was. That a textbook just can't really get across in that same way as a medium.
Right. What they say, a picture, says 1,000 words.
Right.
Yeah. Like, you could read, like, I used to teach U.S. history, Texas and U.S. history, and you can read about the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl all you want, but what's going to have a lasting impact on kids is that picture of the mother holding her children there, or the guys standing in line for soup, or holding the sign with a resume on it, because literally they'll do just about anything from work. For work. Yeah. So the tying the visual to the story is such a key, I think.
It's powerful.
It is.
I mean, it embeds it in their memory. I mean, I remember even when I was young, like Stuart Little, looking at the illustrations. They'd have like illustrations every chapter or so. But I remember those in my mind's eye, those pictures of Stuart Little. So do it with a comic.
I mean, I get kids that recall things from pictures from a comic faster than what they would if they had just read something out of a textbook or a document or something like that. And it's just so neat when they do that. And it's just so powerful that way.
I agree.
Dwight, why don't you tell everybody where they can find your work and or where they can reach out to you on social media?
I'm at hpcomics.net, and we have a newsletter you can sign up for, and we let them know everything before the rest of humanity finds out. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and we also have HP Comics pages on those as well. So, but hpcomics.net, if you go there, you can find all of our social media pages. Oh yeah, our Kickstarter is still going on. There's a mysterious voice behind me that's James knows about that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this Kickstarter that we're doing, it's fine. You may see number 6 and go, oh man, I wish I would have gotten there from the beginning. But you can actually, there's a tier where you can get the graphic novel that collects the first 4 issues, and then you can get issue 5 and 6. And the cool thing about the single issues is that we're doing brand new backup stories about Irving Ratt that are only available in the single issues. They're not going to be reprinted again. So that's kind of cool, I think, and as well as other pinups by some of my friends in the biz. So yeah, check out, just search for on Kickstarter Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe, Allan, right, James?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Don't mess that up, because I did.
Right.
And that wraps up another episode of The Caption Light. We hope you enjoyed this one. We want to say thank you to Dwight for joining us tonight. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you listen to, and follow us on social media at Caption Light.